thank you, Mr. Thadden, for appearing. One of the things that struck me about this national security breach in terms of how it was handled was the length of time that it took between when red flags were first raised in August of 2018 to the time that these two scientists were let out of the lab on July 5th of 2019. That's almost a year. And during that time, these scientists had unfettered access to the lab, even after a fact-finding report was issued in March. Although it was incomplete, it validated that they were, among other things, transferring on an unauthorized basis materials from the lab to the PRC, and that there were multiple security and intellectual property breaches of policy. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on the issue of the timeline in terms of how PAC responded.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think my general purpose reaction is that the time frame allowing them full access was too long. I don't think necessarily that when the red flags were first raised, they should have been handcuffed and walked out of the building. But there were a range of measures that departmental security and the deputy head could have taken to restrict their access, to control where they're going and whatnot. And I think it became increasingly clear, certainly in terms of the material I've read, as time went on, it was more and more serious. And they also could have made the conditions to which they were subjected more serious as time went on. So my bottom line is their general access, their unfettered access until almost the very end was too long.
Yeah, no shit.
And at a bare minimum, they should have had, if they were to remain on the job, had their physical access restricted and had perhaps electronic access restricted. You don't have to cut somebody off entirely in order to limit the threat they pose.
It has been my contention that upon the issuance of that fact-finding report, that immediately thereafter, steps should have been taken to, at the very least, restrict their access. Doesn't mean that they had to be walked out of the lab. But I have to say,
that's not a bad idea either.
Dr. Gilmore was here, and I asked him what new evidence, what new information did PHAC have between the issuance of that report and July 5th of 2019. He said there was nothing more. So, very simply, would you agree at that moment their access should have been restricted?
Yes, sir, I think so.
Another issue that I find troubling was the fact that there were a number of scientists who gained access to the lab from the PRC. Two individuals who were associated with or employed with PRC institutions that CSIS determined to be working against the interests of Canada, as well as a PLA scientist whose mentor is Beijing's foremost expert in bioterrorism and biodefense. Could you comment on how it is possible that scientists with that type of connection to the Beijing regime would have the clearances or be granted access to what is supposed to be Canada's highest security lab?
Well, I think they had a very, very loose access control policy. But it goes to some of the points that I tried to make in my opening remarks. It was not just the departmental security officer or the general manager. The entire system at that point, I think, was not regarding China as seriously as we do today. So I think there's a lot of fault to go around, to put not too fine a point on it, ranging from the departmental security officer to the manager of the lab to the ADM to the deputy head and probably CSIS and the central agencies. But broadly speaking, I think they should not have been allowed that kind of access. If they were to be allowed access, it should have been a controlled access. They should have been escorted. They should have been required to wear a badge. And they should not have been allowed access to the electronic communication system.
Mm-hmm. And it just begs the question, why?
Thank you. And
why do they have the interest?
We have heard the minister
What's with the interest in a Canadian lab?
2019, it was a different time. And that is true to some extent.
COVID hadn't happened yet. Yep.
But it was not as though in 2018 or 2019 or 2017 that there weren't a lot of concerns that Canada had with the activities of the PRC.
Right.
The PRC was a hostile regime at that time. Would you not agree? It was, so I just have some difficulty accepting this notion that it was such a different time.
You make a good point there.
For 2018.
I think, Chair, that I understand where your colleague is coming from, but I also think next to the facts, which you've just expounded, there's this broad issue of culture. And I don't think the culture in this particular lab and in large parts of the public service had caught up with the change in facts as we understand China. So I agree, there was no sea change. There was no button push that changed things. And I think, if you're working in the bottoms of a department or of an agency, it takes a while to register these things. I'd be interested in knowing, for example, if the deputy head or her delegate had caused a note to be sent to the departmental security officer simply saying, I'm told by CSIS and everybody else times have changed. I'm not trying to excuse what happened. I'm just saying that there's a lot of blame to go around.
Right.
And it's both public service and political blame.